Pedro knew every corner of the city. His daily routes took him through wealthy neighborhoods, where majestic mansions stood tall, and through poor areas, where houses barely stood. But what caught his attention most wasn't the difference between the buildings, but how people from these places treated him. In the humbler neighborhoods, he always received a smile, a good morning, or even coffee from someone who recognized the value of his work. In the wealthier neighborhoods, it was as if he didn't exist. Among the many faces he saw every day, there was one he would never forget, Mr. Moreira. Mr. Moreira was a businessman who owned several companies in the city and lived in one of the most imposing mansions in the wealthy neighborhood. He was known for his arrogant attitude and for treating badly anyone he considered inferior. And to him, Pedro was exactly that, someone worthless. Pedro was a man of simple habits. From a young age, he learned to value what he had, even if it was little. He lived in a modest house with his wife, Maria, and their 2 children, Juan and Ana. Pedro's life wasn't easy, but he faced it with dignity. Every day, he woke up early, before sunrise, to start his workday as a garbage collector. While the city still slept, Pedro was already on the streets, wearing his orange uniform, ready to face another day of work. One morning, while Pedro was collecting garbage in front of Mr. Moreira's mansion, the businessman came out with his usual severe expression. He glanced at Pedro and muttered something inaudible, but enough for Pedro to know it wasn't good. As always, Pedro kept his head down and continued his work. He was used to this kind of treatment, but it didn't make it any easier. However, that day, something different happened. While Pedro was picking up the garbage bags, he noticed something on the ground. It was a wallet, worn and dirty, but clearly full of money. Pedro picked it up and, upon opening it, found several credit cards, an ID, and a substantial amount of money. When he saw the name on the ID, Pedro immediately recognized the owner. It was Mr. Moreira. Pedro knew what he had to do. He always believed that honesty was one of the greatest virtues a person could have. And although Mr. Moreira didn't treat him well, Pedro didn't hesitate to do what he considered right. He finished his route and, at the end of his shift, went to the businessman's mansion to return the wallet. When Pedro rang the doorbell, Mr. Moreira took his time to appear. When he finally opened the door, he looked at Pedro with a mixture of surprise and irritation. Pedro, humble as always, extended the wallet and said, "I found this in the trash. I think it's yours." Mr. Moreira took the wallet, looked inside, and after confirming that nothing was missing, simply shook his head in disapproval. Without a word of thanks, he muttered something about Pedro being lucky not to have touched something that wasn't his and slammed the door in the garbage collector's face. Pedro stood there for a few seconds, feeling a pang of sadness and humiliation, but soon shrugged it off and went home. That night, while having dinner with his family, Pedro told them what had happened. Maria, always understanding and caring, said, "You did what was right, Pedro. It doesn't matter how he treated you. You maintained your integrity, and that's what really matters." João and Ana, although still young, admired their father for being an honest and hardworking man. To them, Pedro was a hero, even if the world didn't recognize him as such. Days passed, and Pedro's life continued as usual. He kept working as always, ignoring the small cruelties of people like Mr. Moreira. But fate, always unpredictable, was about to put Pedro in a situation that would change his life forever. One cloudy afternoon, during another workday, Pedro heard a strange sound while passing by a construction site. It was a scream, a desperate cry for help. He stopped the truck and ran toward the sound. As he approached, he saw that part of the building, which was being demolished, had started to collapse. Among the rubble, he spotted a child, trapped and terrified. Pedro didn't think twice. His instinct was faster than his reason. He ran into the danger zone, ignoring the risk to his own life. The child's screams were heartbreaking, and Pedro knew he didn't have much time. With effort, he managed to reach the girl, who was trapped under some beams. Her eyes were full of tears, and she was trembling with fear. "Don't worry, I'm here to get you out," said Pedro in a calm voice, trying to soothe the child while removing the debris that trapped her. With great effort, he freed her and took her in his arms. Without looking back, he ran toward the exit, feeling the ground trembling under his feet. He had barely crossed the safety line when the rest of the building collapsed with a deafening roar. Pedro fell to his knees, still holding the girl in his arms, breathless and covered in dust, but relieved to have saved her. At that moment, he heard hurried footsteps and, looking up, saw a man running toward him. To his surprise, it was Mr. Moreira, with an expression Pedro had never seen before, pure desperation. Mr. Moreira reached Pedro, breathless, his face full of worry and fear. When he saw his daughter safe and sound in the garbage collector's arms, his eyes filled with tears. "My daughter, you saved her," he whispered, gently taking the girl from Pedro's arms. Mr. Moreira hugged her tightly, as if he would never let her go, tears of relief streaming down his face. Pedro, still catching his breath, observed the scene, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. He knew that once again he had done the right thing, but this time something seemed different. The look Mr. Moreira gave him was no longer one of contempt or indifference. It was a look of deep gratitude, something Pedro had never seen before from that man. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. One morning, just a few days after the rescue, Pedro received an unexpected visit at his home. It was Mr. Moreira, accompanied by his daughter and a man who appeared to be his assistant. The businessman, always so formal and distant, now seemed nervous and uncertain, something Pedro never imagined seeing. "Pedro, I would like to talk to you," said Mr. Moreira after a brief exchange of greetings. Pedro nodded and invited them in. In the modest house, Maria served coffee, while João and Ana watched the scene curiously. "I don't know how to thank you, Pedro," Mr. Moreira finally said, finding his words. "You saved the most precious thing in my life. I will never forget that." Pedro, as always, just nodded, feeling a bit uncomfortable with the sudden attention. To him, saving that child wasn't anything extraordinary. It was what anyone should do in such a situation. Mr. Moreira began to speak, a bit hesitant at first, but soon found his rhythm. "Pedro, I made a terrible mistake in judging you, in treating you as if you weren't important. I was blind, arrogant, and didn't see your worth. What you did for my daughter, there's no money in the world that can pay for that. But I would like, at least, to try to compensate for what you and your family have endured because of me." Mr. Moreira listened attentively, surprised by the sincerity in Mr. Moreira's words. The businessman continued, now with more confidence, "I want to offer you a new opportunity. Not just a new job, but a new life. You have qualities that I hadn't recognized until now. I want you to work with me as operations manager in one of my companies. Additionally, I'll ensure your family has a new house in a place where you'll be treated with dignity. I'll also establish an educational fund for your children so that they can have the opportunities you never had." Maria, who was standing beside Pedro, could hardly believe what she was hearing. She looked at her husband, who still seemed to be absorbing it all. Pedro, for a moment, didn't know what to say. The idea of changing his life, of leaving behind the difficulties his family had faced for so many years, was both tempting and frightening. After a few moments of silence, Pedro finally spoke, his voice filled with emotion. I don't know what to say. I never expected something like this. I just did what was right, not because I expected anything in return. But if accepting this can give my family a better life, then I accept, Mr. Moreira. I accept with gratitude." Mr. Moreira smiled, a genuine smile, and extended his hand to Pedro. "You deserve this, Pedro, and I promise this is just the first of many good moments to come." From that day on, Pedro's life changed drastically. The new house that Mr. Moreira provided was comfortable and spacious, a home where he, Maria, and the children could live without worries. In his new job, Pedro quickly stood out. His work ethic, honesty, and willingness to learn made him one of the most respected managers in the company. And, to be honest, he was happy to be able to provide João and Ana with the education he never had. But despite all the changes in his life, Pedro remained the same in essence. He continued to be the same simple and humble man who believed in the value of honest work and the importance of doing good, even when no one was watching. He never forgot his roots and made sure to teach his children the importance of respecting all people, regardless of their profession or social status. Mr. Moreira, in turn, also underwent a transformation. The experience of almost losing his daughter and being saved by someone he despised made him rethink his values and attitudes. He became a more humble and a generous man and developed a sincere friendship with Pedro, something that seemed impossible a few months before. Pedro and his family continued to live in peace, with the tranquility of knowing that, even in the face of adversity, kindness and integrity always prevail. And the city, which once saw Pedro only as a garbage collector, now saw him as a symbol of courage, honesty, and resilience. Pedro's story was told in every corner, inspiring many to believe that no matter how difficult the circumstances, there's always a chance to change one's destiny. You just need to act with courage and do what's right.